But welcome back.
Thank you.
We were just saying, as we got started here, that one of the points I wanted to do, I'm going to do a little midterm reviews, a few questions that seem to trip up more people than others. So I thought I'd go over those if that's helpful, either for overall knowledge or when they might reoccur on the final. But I also just wanted to open it up a little bit, first half of this class, for any feedback on class overall, particular content questions. We're at the halfway mark, so just wanted to give you an opportunity to weigh in and share anything you'd like. And then know that specific midterm questions we'll get to here in just a second. But anybody got any thoughts on the first half? Is it what you're hoping for? Is anything remaining confusing?
So far, so good.
I guess I'm just happy with the class. I don't know a whole lot, the marketing and the whole thing. I know what I see. That's what I guess how I am. I look in what's in the markets and the little liquor stores and stuff, what kind of beer you have, what's out there, how they're presenting it. And then I go to a lot of these like brew clubs, or the things like there's couple places up north, St. Ambrose and the Iron Fish, and see how they're doing it, their marketing, what they're doing. And I mean, this is a lot of help for me. But I know it's going to be, to find your niche, to find what's going to make either your product or your place that you're going to start, or whatever, to advance. It's going to be I think you definitely got to find something unique. There's a lot of the stuff going on here. Looking in the magazines I get, these places are sprouting up quite a bit over the throughout our state, especially the west side.
Yep.
So I mean, that's my input anyway.
Yeah, and we'll be digging into more, at least what that work looks like and how the structure is, and sort of elements of what you should be doing. This class covers so much ground that some of the actual sort of creative brainstorming on what your marketing ideas are will probably be, only touched upon in class time. But sort of the lanes for how to organize yourself in thinking about those things are what we're going to be focusing on. And that's, it's not entirely the second half, but certainly the second half is a little more looking forward now that we understand the terrain. So I think that all this work we did on the first half should lay this foundation to be able to move about with these other forward thinking ideas with the and not have to go back and unpack all that stuff.
I think that this 3-tier system and the licensing, like you said, the lanes you have to, there's not many other businesses that have that kind of structure, that and so your product is going to be really important to differentiate, is how your atmosphere in your brew pub, the label on the bottle, things are going to be a lot different than if you were selling t-shirts and bracelets or something, or cars, or it's just this business has got some real unique features to it. So we got to be kind of thinking about what can you do to differentiate yourself.
That's right. I had that thought this morning. I was in the pharmacist, and I don't know, I was just waiting for something and kind of daydreaming, looking at it, and I was thinking about the old pharmacist, and it dawned on me. I'm like, maybe not technically, but it's a controlled substance. We're moving a product that is regulated as a drug, and so there are very few, like you said, very few industries that have that amount of infrastructure to track and regulate and enforce how that's sold. And, it compares to the medical world more than any other normal, other than that it's, and I suppose in the last few decades, the medical world, the pharmaceutical world has become more branded in their advertising and stuff, but that's sort of a shift, So one of the things is that we are making contact directly with consumers, but our infrastructure of our industry is a lot more, has a lot more in common with sort of medical world in some ways, and then behind the scenes. Our retail presence is like a normal product. Our enforcement and regulation presence is not. And I think that's one of the challenges too, is that the customers don't know, don't necessarily care. They know the basics, drinking age, last call, bring your ID, but they're not aware of all the risk and sort of navigation that the business who's hosting them is going through behind the scenes. And that's a positive thing. It's positive if we can create environments that doesn't feel so laborious and doesn't feel so rule bound. That's a positive thing. We're giving that comfort to the customer, but it's still sort of this reality of you got to work hard to make that feel easy.
I think, I've been going, just hitting websites and stuff and going on these bourbon banters, these things that pop and I go through. There's a lot of software coming out for the industry, from what I see, about trying to keep track of your stock, keep, everything that is wanted to the government, they want you to suffice, as far as where your product's going, how much you have, your waste and all. So I think with the increase of all of these places popping up, it's created a need for things like this. And I think people have seen that have, better smarts than me anyway, as far as, looking at the in the back room kind of thing, what goes on behind the counter and stuff. And I think down the road, it's going to make it a lot easier for everybody getting into it now. We're trying to keep track of their product. So, it is a pretty regulated thing, I guess, but I think looking at a lot of that stuff, it was pretty interesting what they're coming up with.
Yeah. And I think what we're finding too, is that that's scaling smaller and smaller in a positive way. So, when I got in the industry, it didn't exist. We had to kind of write it if we were going to do it. So, I was on a project where we wrote our own database to take advantage of, data management that was new to businesses our size in the 90s. And then, later there's companies that have done that for a long time, but you really had to you had to grow up to have to afford it. It was small, meaning it, you didn't have to be Anheuser-Busch to get it, but you still needed to be kind of grown up to be able to afford those packages. And now I think in the last 5-10 years, you're seeing a lot. The app industry has made a lot of that higher horsepower computing available for less investment and smaller companies, which is really great for this sort of stuff. Because, brew logs and taxes were a lot of pen and paper issues. Even when computers were around, they didn't have a system to manage it. So you still had to file all that paperwork by hand because it had to be on the official form to be submitted. And now they're able to, find compliant programs to do that. So that's, no real huge discovery that we've advanced technologically, but it sure does help this area quite a bit because you can be a small operation and manage your stuff digitally. So that's positive. And important to figure out though, that's, I think one of the things that you brought up or somebody else did was that figuring that stuff out when you're in planning stages is and who's going to do it and what are the resources and do you have a plan of attack to manage your data? You can do that with a lot more calm and whatever pace you need it to go at, whatever sort of homework, whatever time you need to do that homework you have when you're doing it in planning stages, you don't have if you're already making product, because that report is due. And so getting ahead of that curve is really good. And the harder it is for, if you don't have the sort of natural aptitude for that stuff and you got to bring it into the organization, finding that person before you've got overdue obligations is a lot better than looking for them. So not unlike our personal taxes, which probably all done both ways, but trying to find a tax person on April 14th is a little harder than earlier. So anybody else have questions or comments before we get into looking at the midterm? All right. Well, I thought everybody did very well. So that was good. So I'm just going to go through some slides here. Do you see that opening slide? Well, I'm actually going to do this differently. One second. All right. Does that look right? Okay. So covering what we're going to cover today is we're going to go over what I call division of labor. So we're talking about as listed in the syllabus, outlining the key interactions between sales and distribution functions. So we're going to talk about roles, departments, breweries, and distilleries. But first, we're going to go over some questions in the midterm. So I just looked at questions that had more than a couple people miss and wanted to go over that so you could get it. There are operational regulations that can be written and enforced by the MLCC without passing legislation. So I did cover that. I don't know that it was necessarily a bullet point, but the reality is there are license, the code, and I was trying to look for a good place to just define this, and it's really not super clear. But it is important to know that, like, the main liquor code is legislation, and that gets passed, and then MLCC is just enforcement. But rules and regs and a lot of the promotional things, some of the smaller things that can be changed administratively. It still has an approval process, but it isn't a bill becoming a law. So I asked this, and I wanted you to be aware of it, because something could change without there being a law passed. And so keeping up to date and recognizing that there's some moving targets and there's some things that the MLCC can do and address that. Sometimes that I say that as a warning, because you may not get the memo that you would if a law passed. But it's also positive is that sometimes a change you need doesn't require getting a sponsor and a co-sponsor and like pushing it through legislation. Sometimes they can figure out a way to accommodate something you need through an administrative change, which is doesn't have the same obstacles. So we didn't go into that in great detail, but that's the piece there. This next question was about business models and licenses and kind of the difference, and saying in Michigan in the mid 80s, new business models emerged when a few small breweries opened. These new models influenced and encouraged a shift in licenses that would have great impact for many years to come. So that is referencing those stories that we talked about. So Real Ale Company, Bell's, Detroit Mackinac, these were breweries that had a pub model in mind where they wanted to sell beer by the glass, they were opening in order to accomplish a model that was not yet legal. So their business model was their plan, but they needed industry change for that to happen. Then that change opened up a lane for many other breweries to come in and not have to change laws in order to sell beer by the glass. So that's what that was referencing. And it just helps go back and forth, look at the lens of model and license in a bunch of different ways. And that's what that was intended to express. So this, I was actually updating as you were taking the test because I realized I had the slide that I had inherited said, so I taught from it that said authorized delivery agent, but the official term on LARA is authorized distribution agent. So distilled spirits in the state of Michigan are distributed by the ADAs. Everybody calls them ADA, so eventually you forget distribution or delivery. But the point is, these are private companies that have received an ADA license, and that's who's delivering and distributing the spirits. The MLCC is administering the exchange. So there's available confusion there, but that's what we were looking for, is the companies that distribute the spirit actually deliver it to retail. It does engage the MLCC, and a few people got tripped up by that, and it was close, but ADA was what we were going for there. Salespeople need state licenses, but merchandisers who are not taking orders do not. That is false. Anybody making contact with the retailer, so merchandisers are moving cases, stocking shelves, putting signs up, and they also need a salesperson license. Same with owners, anybody that's coming in and having some sort of engagement with the retailer needs to have a salesperson license. So those are the big ones. They're all kind of in that same category, which is confusing regulations from multiple directions. And that's the reality, is that it's confusing. I did a little homework on the now instead of the history of it all. And these 3 links I'll show you here in a second. Manufacturer and wholesale information. These are all hyperlinked in here. New provisions from 18, where they updated some of the provisions for tasting rooms and other things. You know, they made a change with, well, I'll show you in a second. And then salesperson licensing. So these are the current links that really spell it out. And I will pull that up here. Oops. All right, we're going to go. Okay, so the first link goes to here, manufacturer and wholesaler information. So there's a bunch of different places you can get this, but if you want kind of the summary, this is a really good link. So you can just see all the different things that are available and click around. You've got container deposit law, on-premise promotions, labeling, franchise code. This is your kind of one-stop map. The second link is this 2018 revision. So new permits and licenses for tasting rooms. The big thing that we didn't cover is this section here. So if a brewer or microbrewer has more than one on-premise tasting room, this is not a brew pub, mind you, this is a microbrewer. If they have more than one tasting room permit, may sell beer made at any of its manufacturing premises at any of its on-premise tasting room permit locations under one of the following conditions. So this is a fancy way of saying trans-shipping. So if you have beer that you make at your production facility and you have beer you make at your tasting room pub, you're able to take your flagship beer that you made on your big system and you're able to send it to your pub as long as beer made at the other location is sold at an on-premise tasting room that has an installed and functional multi-vessel system capable of producing and fermenting at least 3 barrels. So you need a 3-barrel brew house to be a tasting room. You can't just set up a shop and say, I've got a tasting room. And what was happening is there are some tasting rooms that were not satisfying these requirements before they were written this way. And maybe they had a brew kettle that they would do in the kitchen or something. But there are some tasting rooms, extension of microbreweries that were in the gray area here. Not anymore. Well, I'll get to that in a second. Beer made at another location by the same brewer is transferred to be sold at on-premise tasting room, where at least 50% of the volume at that location is sold to consumers at that location. So that means the pub manufactures at least 50% of its beer for that location. So I think that allows you to have less than a 3-barrel system. So if you had a 1-barrel system, as long as it's selling half the beer at that pub, you're okay. So that would be, these are all meant to make sure that you're brewing or capable of brewing at the second location, but you're allowed to sell beer that was brewed elsewhere. I know that's repetitive, but this language is a little difficult, so repetitive helps. So here's the catch, is that this is a grandfather clause. So beer made at another location by the microbrewers transferred to an on-premise tasting room that was approved by the commission prior to 2018. So like Mitten Brewing has a tasting room in Saugatuck. Their beer is made in Grand Rapids. They probably had the ability to sort of kitchen brew there, but it was approved. And so they're grandfathered in. Jolly Pumpkin Model has locations that aren't really making much beer, or maybe not any. And the original intent of the law was that an additional location for a microbrewer would be capable of brewing beer, but it wasn't very spelled out. Once there was enough licenses and enough creative variations on it, they spelled it out. So that's what this is. And we didn't cover that. So I wanted to take a minute while I was showing you this link to identify that. So there's a bunch of other stuff that came during that time that's good to look over. And again, the point of our class and our material was surface level, was touching, so you understand the relationship between these things and your licenses and what you want to do in terms of a business model. But it would take a lot more time, a lot more weeks to really have felt like we covered all the rules and you know them all backwards and forwards. I don't even know if it's possible, but at least you know where they are and the overall flow of it all. Then salesperson license is that third link. And this also gives you those event things we were talking about. So being able to have the notify them events and know the rules with them. And now there is also there's a requirement for sales person license, and this accreditation program, there's 2 of them so that you can get your salesperson license. That's relatively new. Probably within a few years, I'm not sure. But anyways, these are important links that I don't think were as clear. And when you start thinking around in here, it's not that easy to spell out. So I thought I'd at least whittle it down. So that's both the midterm review. Overall, seemed like there's a pretty good understanding of everything else. And I thought those answers and those links would be helpful. Anybody have any questions there before we move on? All right. So we'll jump back in. You guys see the slide properly? Great. So division of labor. So this breaks a lot of my PowerPoint rules because it's a ton of information on one slide, but we're going to go piece by piece. Basically, this presentation is one slide. And we'll go piece by piece and see how it goes. So overall, we're going to go left to right. And what I have here is the brewery distillery is that top box. And then the idea is that, you know, whether you are a brew pub only or whether you're a microbrewery or a brewery with a tasting room and a distillery with a tasting room, the bottom box is just going to express some differences that apply to once you have that retail portion of your business. And so these are meant to be a little bit, well, we'll just see how it goes. What I want to say is these are meant to cover various types of businesses and various types of license. Now we're just talking about what sort of shape does a business take. So the first department or category that I want to introduce is executive. You know, there could be other companies can call this whatever they want to call it. If executive feels too formal, then you can call it, you know, leadership or owners or whatever. But in general, this is the overarching infrastructure for the company. So it's not necessarily making stuff. The same people might be in other departments. And that's one caveat, is that you could be a 2-person operation. You're still going to have the responsibilities that we're going to go over here might all be on one person's desk, but they're still sort of switching hats to do those different things. So the executive is talking about the ownership, the leadership, who's the visionary, whose idea, who's making the decisions about, you know, yes, we want to do that. We want to head this direction. Yes, we're going to invest in this. That decision maker is part of this category, and important to understand who has a stake in those decisions. Finance is pretty obvious, but, you know, managing the money is crucial. And so, and it's oftentimes separate from the more operational departments. Human resources this is all gonna depend on the size of the company. But human resources could really break out. Same with, well, I would say finance, human resources, and compliance. These 4 here, they could easily become their own department as a company got larger. But generally speaking, on a small company, they're rolled into that executive ownership role. And so human resources is both, you know, talking about the integration of employees, the care for all of the things that employees need, the training, the compliance, whether that be with government, with taxes, with payroll, HR law, all that stuff is in this category. And then mission and vision related areas of focus, I just put that there because that's conditional on what the organization's about, what they've decided is important to their executive and visionary team. Meaning one company might have a sustainability chair on this, and they've decided it's executive level. Another person might have, you know, charitable giving up here because that's a substantial part of their mission. So whatever it is, this can all be shaped. But I think one thing that people forget is that, you know, this area of responsibility is adjacent to and outside of what might have been why you wanted to open a brewery or distillery. I want to make spirits. I want to make whiskey. I want to make beer. Well, there's all this other stuff that's going on that's going to take up time and focus and needs attention. And so it's just an important thing to understand is who's got the ball in those categories. and how does it relate to everything else? So then you have production, you know, and I'll try to avoid going through each one of these items, or I might end up mentioning them because I do think this is operations and marketing, right? So we're going to talk about further right on this, and somebody else is teaching you how to do these things and how to organize these things. But I'm partly just laying out, you know, my experience and my view of how to sort of understand the flow of things through an organization. And so, product development there was meant to be on one line. But product development is saying, so, you know, who's in charge of the recipe creation? Who's deciding when, you know, what products you make, what, what their specs are, what is the target, what's good enough. That'll also get into QA, QC, but that's different than brewing and distilling as like a line brewer, as a shift brewer, shift distiller. And that does end up really relating to how sales and marketing can understand how to talk about what's coming off of production. Is who do they talk to about what, and how are these connections going, and how is the product development conversation happening? Is that exclusively in one person's lap and they make whatever they want to make and then everybody else figures out how to sell it? Or is it more of a round table? Hey, we should have our you know, we should have the key people from the marketplace, the whoever's the head of sales and marketing and the owner and the brewmaster, they should all, is that a collaboration where they decide what's being made? All that is to be discussed. Oops. Hey, this thing's out of control. And then QA, QC, that, you know, in a lot of discussions is best when it's really considered outside of production, because if they have production bias, let's say, or production needs, meaning, hey, we got to hit this production number, that can really influence, you know, you would like your quality control people to not to have an investment solely in quality versus in we got to hit our number today, because that can create pressure to say, well, I think it's good enough. But again, that's not what we're teaching today. I just digress. I wanted to explain that in broad strokes, it's under production. It's usually under that team, the smaller the company is. And eventually that starts to grow up and grow out and be a related department to production. And production's got to pass through QA, QC to get forward. Seller, packaging, these are all paths of the product being made. And again, I'll just repeat that on a very small scale, these might all be done by one person, but it's really important to start seeing this segmentation, I think, in terms of responsibilities. Mechanical, safety, training. Since we're really going to focus on, well, I do think that this is in operations. And so I don't want to skip over it, other than there's operational management that really needs to be invested here in terms of strategy of how you're managing people, strategy in terms of how you're managing the flow of information and communication, and strategy in terms of delegation of responsibilities. If the shift brewer thinks that they have empowered authority to vary the beer, then that is a different situation than somebody who knows a very tight spec that they need to hit, that was established by the product development team and then tested by the quality assurance team. Does that make sense? Either of those systems can be valid, meaning if whether typically I would say a lot of times it varies on how wide your distribution is. But these days, you know, things have grown up a lot where there are widely distributed breweries that aren't trying to replicate their beer each time or their spirit. But generally speaking, what you put out into the marketplace that's covering a lot of ground, you want the customer to know what to expect. So there's a replication process. It's a different management process to say, we're going to create this product, you know it, you love it, and I'm going to make it so that it's the same every day, every state. No matter how far it traveled, it's going to live up to our promise. That requires a different managerial approach to production. Then we make great stuff, and it has room for seasonal variants, for variants depending on who brewed it, batch to batch variants. That ends up relating to what's the vision and what's your method going to be, and who are you hiring and how are you training them. So these are then shaded to show that as it gets red, you're into this tasting room model. So food production is really, or kitchen management is really food production. So you have a chef or a kitchen manager, whatever you call them, you've got somebody in charge of that. Is that the same as menu development? Depends. So these are decisions you got to make. You can hire a chef and say, you're responsible for creating menu items, changing the menu, not changing the menu. Or you could hire somebody and say, we've got a set menu, I need you to run the kitchen. That's all preference. But what you need is it on your radar that that's the decision tree, so that you can be having those conversations intentionally, so that people know what's up. And same idea, these are analogous to each other in a lot of ways, and I've used it explaining it on either side. Saying a line cook, do they have room to say, well, I like it this way, I do my own thing, or are they trying to replicate a set item that needs to be the same today as it was yesterday? Dishwasher, mechanical, these are all parts of the operation that, again, if you look at it overview wise, like we are now, this could be something that might influence whether you want to tackle a tasting room or not. Or if you were tackling a tasting room, we need to start having this conversation. Who's going to oversee this? So that's, and looking at that as a production, sort of through a production lens, will make for a stronger kitchen, versus the pub is retail and the production brewery or production distillery is production. That sometimes it'll overlook that need for production like talent at the retail establishment, which can create some sort of voids in terms of attention. Meaning, and I think we saw this a lot in the early years, you still see it from time to time, but sort of the stapled on kitchen. Well, we wanted to make beer. We needed to serve food. So we threw some sandwiches together. And they don't, they're entering the industry as a maker, as a producer of things, as a brewery. But then they don't take that part of their mission, part of their vision, and apply it to the kitchen. So from a consumer, you start saying, well, if you're so serious about food and drink, why is your food lame? So I think that, your mission and vision shows up in anything you do. So recognizing that, hey, if we're entering this world, we should be good at it. Doesn't mean we have to be fine dining, but we should have an approach to quality for our food that reflects our approach to quality in our beverages that we're making. At least that's my opinion. That there should be some consistency in terms of recognizing your appreciation for approach and quality and aesthetic. So logistics, this is another one where, like, It can be sort of mind blowing if you haven't thought about it. But I separate this from production because as a company grows, it becomes more separate. So managing a warehouse, the more product you have, the more complicated it gets. Rotating stock, making sure that the oldest product is moving out the shipping door and the newest product is not getting stacked in front of it and sold first, leaving something to get old and dated in the back. Making sure you know not only the numbers like we've talked about in terms of where is everything and are you paying taxes, but efficiencies and being able to move product smoothly, swiftly, and accurately, not only to prevent losses, but to prevent aged beer or spirits. Shipping, so managing invoices, managing orders, how far out, what's your order process? How far out do you want people ordering? This is this could be mostly distribution here where I'm talking about these bigger departments or these bigger lanes. But if you have 2 tasting rooms, or even if you have 1 tasting room, is the tasting room manager the same person as the brewer distiller? Do they need to be ordering product from production so that they get it right? And do they know how much they need and where it is? And when are you crossing that threshold? When does that product leave the production warehouse and go to the tasting room floor? And how are you accounting for that? And when somebody stocks the shelves in the tasting room, do they know where they're pulling from, et cetera? So that really goes into shipping, right? Because it's leaving your manufacturer's warehouse, even if it's crossing the basement floor. There's a transactional moment when that becomes a tasting room. Now, there's different ways to organize that, and we're not going to be able to go into really teaching the specifics of it, but I want you to recognize that transactional boundary between this is product waiting, that's off the packaging line and not in retail inventory, and now it is. Spirits, this becomes very significant because moving it across out of the bonded territory is expensive, and it's where the state is going to take their markup. And so when it's held as production inventory, it has not paid that yet. When it moves over to the tasting room, it does. So that's really important to recognize. Purchasing. So this, I debated. This could very well be on the, my mouse is, I keep moving my arrow around and changing these slides. The purchasing could very well be in production when you're talking about malts, hops, yeast, materials like that. When you're talking about food, ingredients for the kitchen. But really it's logistics, right? Moving things back and forth between outside vendors and getting them in the building in time for the production team to have it so that they, when they go to mill in, they have the grains they need. It's really a separate job. The clipboard management of how long does it take to get things? Who are we getting it from? How fast are we burning through it? What are our pars? That's really a different brain than going in to make beer or food or spirits for the day. So purchasing is a logistical role that may be held by different people at different in different models, but it's really important to identify because it can hang you up. If you don't have what you need to make product for the day, your day's shot. And if nobody saw it coming, if you saw it coming, you could change what was on the schedule. Meaning that's going to be late, so we're going to make something else tomorrow. If you find out when you with an empty bin, then now you're causing a lot of extra costs and time. And if you're a larger, this could go for small or large. If it was packaging and you run out of kegs or you run out of 6-packs or you run out of labels, if that was expected to be either at your tasting room or at a distributor the next day, now you're costing yourself not only the time, but you're costing money because it's products that weren't sold. So this purchasing role, thinking about logistics, and I consider logistics to be things that are moving, that are required for the job, that are outside of the job. And purchasing is inbound and shipping is outbound. Simply put, waste management, recycling. What are you doing with your stuff? What are you doing with your spent grain? Waste stream in general is really a logistical role. It's another sort of outbound. Are you going to have a relationship with farmers to take spent grain? If so, who's managing it? When do they pick up? That's all important and outside of the job of making stuff. But if you don't have a place to, if it all piles up and you can't move your spent grain somewhere, then it's going to stop production. So it's adjacent to and related to, but really different. Material handling, in and out deposits. So, I might come up with a better word here, but material handling is stuff I was thinking about, like keg floats. Do you own your kegs? Do you lease your kegs? Thinking about pallets and pallet slips, things that have deposits on them that you need to track and you need to understand where they're supposed to go and you need to store. That's what I'm thinking about with material handling. It could be a little confusing because packaging material that you're purchasing also might be considered material, but I put in and out with deposit here because that's stuff that you either own or you've leased or you owe part of it back. So, and I think just about everybody has this, especially in Michigan. You've got returnables to deal with. Customers are bringing returnables in, kegs, growlers, all that stuff. Drivers, self-distribution. So if you're a self-distributed brewery, who's delivering the beer in what? So fleet management would be the vehicles. Compliance is sort of making sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. I have compliance in executive side and in logistics side. It's sort of an either or both. That the executive side is probably sending the report to the government, and logistics would be in a larger organization where you're sending the mostly complete or all the way complete report to your compliance person, who then checks it over and takes care of it and actually pays the taxes. So going down to the tasting room side, you've got food and beverage purchasing, which would just be a separate set of vendors and really a separate process than your grain and hops and six packs. And then you have, the potential for delivery. Are you delivering food? All that sort of stuff. So once stuff's moving outbound, it's in this category. And you may or may not have all these things, but they are certainly part of the path towards bringing your product to the world. So that's this next step. So over to the right, you have the happy consumers waiting for your product. And I put this arrow in here saying back of house, front of house. So I look at this the same way or similarly, meaning that's down at the bottom because there's room for it. But back of the house, production and logistics are back of the house, whether that be in a true restaurant setting that those terms are born from or borrowed from. But that's either less or not consistent consumer contact. So the production and logistics are behind the scenes, whether that be a tasting room or production organization. So going to the front of house is where we're making contact with customers. Those customers could be distributors, it could be retailers, it can be consumers. Sales very well might be making contact with all of those. Now, owners, brewers, distillers, shipping, those employees also might be making contact with retail or consumers, but they're more likely doing it through a sales portal, if that makes sense, or through with sales guidance. Hold on one moment. I'm going to change some lighting. So, so I don't mean to say, what I'm clarifying there is it doesn't mean that no one from production will ever talk to a retailer or a distributor or the owner. You know, once you have a salesperson, the owner shouldn't talk to them. That's not the case. But there's a responsibility here where sales is the point of connection. Or at least you should recognize that once you're making contact, you are in the act of selling. That's maybe more true to the point. So sales planning, forecasting, strategy, how far do we want to sell? How much are we going to sell? To whom are we going to sell it? Sales management, how many salespeople are we going to have? Who's overseeing them? Who's running the reports to see how we did? Who's reviewing our progress? Who's reviewing the progress with distributors, which takes us into distribution management? Are we going to have distributors, and who makes contact with them? And who oversees them? Who visits them? How frequently? What what are you going to meet with? And we're going to dig into more of this stuff when the weeks for sales and marketing come up. So right now we're laying a map. But if you have distributors, you have someone managing them. You also, sales to retail, it means that you're not, well, you could be self-distributed, so you can sell to retail. But even if you're through a distributor, who's making contact, who's promoting sales at retail? So visiting the retailers and saying, you know, I'm here from Brewery X, and I want to tell you about our beers, which you buy from the distributor. That's a role as well as distribution management. And sometimes those are different people. You might have, a larger company might have people with smaller territories. I'm covering Ann Arbor. I go to the retailers. I talk to them about our beer. Somebody else might be calling on the distributor and taking the orders for the whole state. And then channel sales. So that's kind of a revised word. It gets called a lot of different things. People might call this key account management. They might call it chain sales. They might call it anything along those lines. But who's responsible for talking to Meijer and Spartan and Kroger and Costco, or on-premise chains, Buffalo Wild Wings or whoever else, Hopcat? Those channel sales are a little different sales effort and a little different planning than a regular account. And so again, that's a role. Now, as I go through this, I just feel the need to reiterate, we're not even through this and we've got 20, 30 roles on here. It doesn't mean that these are all jobs, although they could be, right? The larger you are, the more delegated and the more split up this gets, because you have enough business that channel sales itself is a full-time job, or it might have 3 full-time jobs. But early on, you still have all these roles. All these things, well, not all of them, most of these things still need to happen. Like if you're not in chains, you don't have channel sales role. But if you are, you do, even if it's just an extra responsibility for the person who does all of the sales. And self-distribution is in parentheses because I wanted to identify it, but it's also kind of under distribution management and sales to retail. But that would certainly be a shift in terms of whether you have that in your business or not. So sales, it is a tasting room is sales. And so this is where product is going out and you're taking money for it. So not everybody thinks of them as sales in that role, but it is in that category of business. So you have a tasting room manager, or a pub manager, or a restaurant manager, or GM, whatever you want to call it. But I'm really sticking with some of the tasting room nomenclature here so that we kind of just can keep things straight. But what an organization calls it is really up to them. So you have management, you have servers, you have tips training to administer or to achieve. You have to-go sales, you have merchandise sales, you have catering. These are all different types of sales that could happen from your tasting room. And again, it's a little bit of a menu item, meaning you could say, we're not doing that. We're not doing the other thing. All we want to do is sell beer over the bar. And the tasting room manager is the bartender and the server and the cleanup, and they're one person, their tips trained. That's all fine. But most of these things are happening. Some of them are options. All right. We got one more left. Marketing. So a lot more words. But I like to spell out the differences of some of these things because sales and marketing are often lumped together. And it's for good reason, because they're usually done together. The younger and smaller an organization is, the more merged these two lanes are. The same way production and logistics are merged in a small organization. Sales and marketing is done at the same time, and it's often done in the same sort of effort, meaning our marketing is our label, is the side of our case, is the business card we left on the bar. We don't have a separate marketing campaign. But as a company grows, those hopefully will start to divide and have individual responsibility. And even in the beginning, there's the parts of marketing that I want to spell out as brand development. Who's choosing what the products are called, what they look like, what goes on the label? That's happening. And it's different than selling. Even if, the VP of sales and marketing does it, they have a marketing hat and they have a sales hat. But it also could be that the owner writes the recipes, makes the label, decides the products, and then they hand it off to the sales team to go sell. That's fine. But it's just important I think, to walk through these things and understand that those are happening. You can see the sequence better if you pull them apart. Brand message. And brand development is not just, I kind of broke my own rule there. I was talking about that really as package design, and brand development is also what is your brand identity? What do you want to be known for? How are you expressing your mission and vision? What are some of your, what's your identity? Who do you want to be? That can be your parent logo development as well, because you have the identity of your company, and then you'll have identity of products, and those should be related to one another and should be feeding each other, but they are separate exercises. Brand messaging then is how are you talking about your brand? What is your voice? What are your storylines? What are the things that are important or aligned with your brand? That's going to be helpful. We like to be, the brands that you probably have in your memory in terms of favorite brands. You could tell me about things that they care about, things that are related to them, things that are important to them, because they've been consistent with brand messaging, talking about what they're about. That's different, but related to their it's sort of the ingredients oftentimes, or the communication method of their brand identity. Social media, big thing. Who's doing it? What is the plan? Is there a content plan? Is it catch as catch can? Is it the owner's Instagram account? Or is there a coordinated effort to sequence out the brand messaging through social media? That'll change based on size and intention. But again, if it's just an afterthought, then it will act as an afterthought. Package design. Just wanted to spell it out as being different than your overall company brand. It's even different than, just product development, meaning what does it look like? And are there consistencies between different products? Are there differences? Are there series? How does our product look in the marketplace? And merchandise design. What merchandise are we going to have? Why? What does it look like? Are we going to put our product brands on it? Are we going to put our company brands on it? Either or, both, etc. Getting that designed is different than selling it, and it's just important to understand that. This is a part that gets confused a lot, or let's just say gets blended a lot, is that event creation and event execution. So those are often on the sales shoulders, on the sales lane for a long time, especially through the growth stages. And that's because you're doing them at retail and you're selling product at them. And I wouldn't argue to move them over there, except for that events should be intended to be marketing, to be sharing the story of the brand, to be reaching people you wouldn't reach otherwise, to be gaining exposure and contact and connection and deepening your relationship with customers, or reaching customers that you hadn't prior. That's marketing. They can also sell more product or sell some product. And so there's no question that there's an engagement. That's where sales and marketing come together. But understanding who can create events, who does create events, who creates great events. Are they meant to be small and at retailers, or are you looking to do a company-wide anniversary party that's a big blowout and brings the whole town in? Or is it a promotion at Joe's Bar and Grill? All of that is coordinated and thought about, and should be done with a marketing hat on for the moment. That will also help you. Again, we'll go into more detail when we're in that section, I think, but having an understanding that these are separate things and really belong to the marketing lane will help you decide what to invest in. Is that everybody that asks you to be at their event, it's all changed with COVID, and I'm sure it's really crazy right now in an absent sort of way. But I think one of the realities of being a manufacturer of alcohol in the public realm is that everybody wants you at their events. Hey, we're doing a fundraiser. We got can you donate product? Can you show up? Can you tell people about your beer or spirit? You're asked to be at more places than you can humanly be possible. And so figuring out, well, which of those events sort of fit my brand, fit my brand identity, help our sales, make sense to, that are aligned with us for different reasons. Understanding that this lane, that is not just a thing that you have to do, is really helpful. Tours. So tours could be over in production, because most likely they're going to be walking through production, and they might be done by a brewer. or distiller. But the reality is they are marketing. They are bringing people into your place of production to teach them about what you do, taste them out on your products, and to educate them about why you're different, and why you're worth it, and why they should hang out more and enjoy more of your product. That's marketing. So if tours were just done as either an obligation or something else without understanding that they have a marketing role, opportunities could really be overlooked. And, I don't love the word marketing. I have often replaced it. I had departments called branding and distribution instead of marketing and sales, because, and again, maybe I'm stealing punchlines from the marketing week, but there's an overall impression that marketing is about making stuff up to sell things, and that's because there's a lot of bad marketing out there, and there's a lot of products out there, and we're over marketed to. We get it from all angles in today's society. But if you really drill down to what is its role, it's there to communicate your brand identity and your brand messaging, and carry your invitation to consumers and your brand promise, so that they can choose to engage with you and invest in your experience, your products and experience, and give you their money and walk away satisfied. So that communication of expectation is essential for them to feel like you delivered on what you said you were going to give them. Here's an IPA, it tastes like this. If it delivers on that promise, then they have an opportunity to be happy and say, I'd like another one. That worked out great. So I know that's a really big simplification, but the idea is that I wanted to spell some of the things out so you can understand how these interactions happen. That shaping your tours to accomplish its communication role and help people understand why you do what you do, how you do it, is going to make for better tours. And it's going to get them on the docket as something that you offer versus just tacked on as another thing you haven't gotten to. So is it important to you? That's going to be up to the team that's managing operations and marketing and that owns the place. But considering it in that light is what I'm talking about. Brand and product training. So this is often not on the list for a startup company. And the reason being is that the person doing all this stuff knows their brand and their product really well because they created it, because they're the owner, entrepreneur, chef, cook, and bottle washer. So the challenge comes in when they want to delegate to somebody else to take that message forward to consumers. And the first ring of people were probably in the room when it got started, or in the first couple of years. They learned it all through osmosis because you're in the trenches together, you're standing next to each other. And the brand story, why this product came to be, how it got made, why it's different, all that stuff happens through adjacency versus training. But if you want your distributor talking about your product and your brand in a way that's accurate and authentic and enthusiastic, you're going to have to teach them. You're going to have to tell them why you do this, why you do that, how it came to be, why you're passionate, why you care about it, why this was why this product is important. And so who's doing that, and who's setting that time aside, and what materials do you have for it? That's another piece of marketing that it's just different than making ads and fun and sort of the, those memes that are out there where it's like, what I say I do, what my parents think I do. Those are usually pretty funny. I think marketing, I don't have one, and I'm not going to teach through memes, but marketing is often misinterpreted as, just the flashy stuff. And, oh, so you make the labels and create all the fun stuff. It's true, but there's these nuts and bolts. This is the lane where the information about your product and why it's important gets out. And so if you're the owner and you don't have that passion or personality or interest in shaping that, then you need to find collaborators who do. And if you have all that brain and you don't necessarily have the production side, then you need collaborators that do. And if you have it all, then you can do it all while you're getting started. But as you grow, you're going to need to start choosing lanes to add people to. Which one do you add first? Do you add production staff to help you make more, or do you add, sales or marketing staff to help you create independence in that responsibility? Those are the types of things that you can be making decisions on when you think about this in these lanes or categories. Marketing in the restaurant. Some places are, well, the restaurant side, meaning restaurateurs who weren't necessarily grown up as a brewery or distillery, they can be very good at this. And brew pubs that have imported talent and general managers that come from this world are usually pretty good at menu training and in-house events, off-site events. But tasting rooms that grew up as a brewery and then started serving food, they often skip some of these steps, and it can show because they don't have that pre-shift mentality of how are we coaching our servers and staff to talk to the consumers about what we make and why we make it. And when you're at a brew pub or a distillery, you've got a deeper menu to train, because they'd have to not only know about food and the specials today and whatever they need to know about your food menu. Now they have a much more diverse beverage offering than a typical restaurant, because it could be changing. This beer could have been developed last week, might not have been sold anywhere else. So that idea that well, I guess I'm just saying that marketing is about in-house coaching and development and training, as well as it is out. That if you want the consumers to really have a consistent message on what you do and why you do it, then your staff has to be saying this similar things to one another and all have a deep understanding of who you are and what you do. And if that happens, then sales picks up. If sales picks up, then you're making more product. So this direction is back and forth. And this connection between back of house and front of house is something we'll continue to cover here in the second half of this class, because it's crucial. This gap in the center here is often where there can be a divide. And I see this as a shift in response and sort of type of category of business, and in terms of types of roles and contact and responsibilities. But historically, these groups don't always understand each other. And from a personnel point of view and from a culture point of view, the sales and marketing personality is often more fluid and more in the moment and fast moving and adaptable and changing. And the production and logistics personality is often wants a more order and structure. And we said it, the plan was going to be this. Why has it changed? It can't change. It needs to be this. These are broad generalizations, but I'm just saying historically that these are different parts of our organization, and finding ways thinking about them ahead of time, even if it's 2 parts of your week, thinking about them in these lenses will help you find the efficiencies, find the areas of sort of smoothing out disruption and surprise, and try to reduce the amount of, I guess when I say surprise, I was just thinking about recategorizing that as, things that weren't considered, and then you get surprised when it shows up as something that's really important and needs to be addressed. That can be like having the sales side of your team communicate well, having a path so that communicates all the way to purchasing, right? So, hey, I just landed a 20 account, chain that's going to open up, that's going to place us in 20. Well, so we're going to have 3 brands placed in 20 stores. That's 120 cases maybe. Is that normal? Is that no big deal? Or is that going to really deplete inventory, and they should start thinking about changing their brew schedule to accommodate, so that in 2 weeks you're not out? So that's starting to get into more details than I wanted for this week, and because we'll cover forecasting, we're going to cover planning, and again, we'll at least touch on all of them, and you'll get some specific skills there. But similar to how we wanted to have the laws and the regulations and the license and the models as sort of foundation, I felt like this division of labor is going to set up why we're going to learn skills in each of these categories and how they impact one another. Because there's no question that success in any model requires connectivity between all of these lanes. And it can't exist that there's 1 or 2 people that are covering all of these things because they're a 1 or 2 person operation. But if they're really successful and continuing to be successful, meaning it wasn't just a great first week and then they ran out and the wheels came off, if they have sustained success, it means they're succeeding in all of these categories. People are learning about their brand, they're buying it, they're being satisfied with that delivered on what they expected, and the quality is kept up and it's delivered on time, and they didn't run out and they didn't fail, and it was consistent with their overall impression of the brand. So that's kind of the breakdown as I see it. And I think what I'll do, it was a whole lot of talking. So I'm going to stop the share for a second. We can put it back up if anybody wants to look at anything, but I just thought I'd check in and see how we're all doing. If you guys have questions or comments. It's a different subject, but it's still a big chunk of information.
Fred, I was thinking there's a brewery that I really like their product, but when you drive in there, their parking lot is a piece of crap. There's just potholes, and the trucks all go in there, and to the back of the building, you go into the restaurant, tasting room, bar in the front, and I just can't help but think it's like, man, they got this wonderful, wonderful beer, but yet, look at this parking lot. And it's, and I think it's the same thing and I've driven, different types of trucks and we've had some nasty trucks, and we'd have to take these into places, and people would look at that truck, and it's, any kind of fluid that the truck had, it was leaking, except for the washer fluid, because it was leaking so bad you couldn't pour it in fast enough, so it all leaked out before you left the yard. But but those are the, little things like that the customer, I think, like when they say to people, go look at the bathroom, and then that's what they judge your entire operation on. And so I think that there's, that customer perception goes really deep into the, into the logistics, into the warehousing. And I just don't think that you can miss out on any of these items, even though it may cost you some money to repave a parking lot, or wash the truck and put some new seals in it or something.
Yep, it all counts. And I think, sometimes a lot of times, the entrepreneurs are the makers that, sometimes there's this opinion of like, well, listen, I'm just all about making the beer. I'm not worried about that stuff. That's somebody else's job. Well, my coaching is always, if you're not worried about it, somebody is. It just might be the consumer. And, they're saying, I mean, it can be, I love a good dive bar, and I have lots of fond memories of early microbreweries that were duct taped together. So it's all relative. It can be charming to a point. And so my thought isn't what it should or shouldn't be. It's, are you looking at it, and are you recognizing that that's part of your exchange with the customer, so that then you can make good decisions about, hey, that driveway was cute until we started getting flat tires, or until we got into our second year and, we started buying other stuff, and it's like, well, what's the priority? So I think if you understand these categories, it'll help you. One, I think it's a little bit of a eye opener for the entrepreneurial. It's like an entrepreneurial wake up call is, you want to open a brewery. It's a lot more than making beer. And so this is one of those moments. And then once you're there, it helps, I think, prioritize that each one of these needs love and attention, in various degrees for any organization. Drives me crazy if, just pet peeve is like, especially if I know, say I know the owner, I know the company, and you go in and a server just doesn't care and either doesn't care or hasn't been trained, and they're just there. It's really frustrating, and it's an area that hasn't been paid attention to. And it's like, well, they just, it's like somewhere somebody thought, well, they just need to bring the glass to the table. And I think, well, that is a dangerous oversight. And I could say that, I think the front of house examples are really easy to draw on and to conjure up for us because we're customers. So we have tons of those examples that we've experienced on the customer side, and then we can see it on the business side. The other ones are a little harder to conjure up unless you've been there. But somebody who didn't think about quality having a QA QC program, or somebody who didn't think about who was in charge of tracking inventory on raw materials, or having a system for that, those will create some pretty big gaps in a hurry as well. So the more attentive and the more understanding you are of these roles, like, again, if I go back and I just think, if you didn't know all the lists, but you at least could understand that there's this executive, production, logistics, sales, and marketing to any operation, including restaurants, that would already make you more likely to catch important things than not.
Yeah, I think I'm all about training. I guess it's a lot of extent. I worked at one of the automotive companies, and all I did was train all the skill trades, put them through all their training and stuff. I didn't actually do the training, but I set it up. But as I go through a lot and sitting a lot of these, like something kept Michigan by the bottle and stuff like that, things like that. You go in, and if you ask them, okay, well, what do you think about this wine? And in a lot of, you get, well, I don't know. What does the menu say? To me, if your personnel, the people you have, if you put the time and effort into training them on what your product is, what you're about, if somebody asks them, what is it? What's this? What's this food? What is that like? Is it spicy? What's this beer like? Is it red? And if they're asking them, if they're engaging in them, that, well, what is it that you like, or what's your flavor? Do you want to go try something different? And they can explain, or they can tell you what it is and let you make the decision. Or like my daughter has a thing that she does, and it's kind of, it's like she'll ask the server, well, what do you like? What's your favorite out of here? And why is it your favorite? I think that if you're, because to me, there's a difference between an entrepreneur and an owner. I mean, I got some years on me, and I've been into a ton of bars, and you have a lot of the owners that were just has the bar, and they got their locals and they're making it. But if you have an entrepreneur that really cares, I think, and really wants to look after his establishment, and it's a reflection on him, like Frank says, with the parking lot, they're going to look at all that to make sure what their place looks like is a reflection of them. And I mean, that's, I don't know, I'm probably rambling, which I often do, but I think, if you put your training into your people, and we all know, if you're going to have a waitress, they may be there a month, they may be there 10 years. But even that one that's there a month, if you train them and they understand what you're about, what they're going to do with their training and telling people, they're going to if they bring in 5 other people, and those 5 other people are going to bring in 5 other people. I think that's where where it works. I think that's,
and I think to borrow on the driveway metaphor, one of the potholes for this is usually in the ongoing time periods that aren't, so you open the new place, you train everybody up. You have a new product line or something coming up, or you have a new menu, you train everybody up. Well, is there a plan for the in-between times when somebody leaves and somebody gets hired? How does that new person that came in when there wasn't a big event, how are they getting trained? And this goes for all categories. Production, new brewer comes in 18 months after you're open. What's the plan for them to understand the company orientation? Because a small company doesn't necessarily have a department that's sitting, that's just paying attention to all that stuff. So thinking about training, not from just a getting started point of view, but from a sustainable, ongoing management point of view, that's really a difference maker in companies. Is that when they bring on new people, there's a method for them to become brand ready, process ready in a short period of time. The large organizations, they have that. And like your role, they have people in charge of setting up training. A small organization are just trying to run their business, and then they hire somebody. Interviewing them and hiring them is hard enough. Now we got to get to work. There's a lot of opportunities to skip it. And so the thing with, what I love about this program and about, the overall idea of getting this education ahead of time is you at least get some heads up to say, okay, I got to put some of this in planning to be ready for the things that I wouldn't have seen had I not kind of been through this process. And so there's a lot of production stuff, and that's what I'm spelling out, whether it's training or anything else, that forethought will be your friend.
True. I believe that. I get, but this is where I guess I'm thinking is, if I'm going to bring in somebody and I'm still trying to, if I'm small and I'm trying to make it, if I bring in a waitress to serve the product, yeah, if she drinks beer, if she drinks beer, wine and stuff, I would, at least for me anyway, they would have to sit down and taste everything that we're making. They don't have to have a meal. Taste it so they can experience it. So when somebody does ask them, what is this like? well, it's got this, and that. I've had a little bit in, this is some, I think, the details and stuff, the personal thing.
Yep.
I think,
Yep. And I guess I'm just encouraging systems to make sure that happens. So yes, I concur that it should happen. But when a new product rolls out on Wednesday, it gets tapped. The brewer taps a keg and puts a handle on and says, "You're rolling." It's on the chalkboard. Who talks to servers? When does that happen? And what I'm saying is there's not one way other than that. A strong organization that understands these lanes is going to have a system that says, hey, before we tap any keg, or the first thing you do when you tap a keg is we're going to pre-shift or whatever it is. Here's how that gets expressed throughout our organization. And that goes the same for 4-person operation as a 400-person operation. It's easier for osmosis to get it done and to not realize you have the gap when you're a 4-person operation, because it's a quick solve. If one person didn't hear it and then you tell them, oh yeah, you haven't had this, try it, you're solved. So it gets overlooked that you may be recurring, that miss may be recurring, or you may be dodging it. But as you get bigger, it becomes costlier because now you missed a whole team. So yes, I agree with you. And I think I'm just reiterating that from an operations and marketing point of view, it's understanding that need, understanding the lanes, and developing systems to keep them connected. And I'm not teaching you a system because there isn't a system, because there's all these different sizes, types, and and you'd have one system when you're 1-year-old, you might have a different system when you're 5 years old because your business has grown. And so the importance is being able to do that organically and in regard to your specific organization. Any other questions about that?
I guess when you're listening to Paul and you talking about, I think what I would do if I had a business is I would think about like setting up a table on the shipping dock, or in the lab, or in the brew house itself, and there would actually be customers sitting there, and you'd be serving them, and so you'd have to perform, as the customers were actually seeing what you're doing, and all the background, at the executive level, when you're making these visionary statements, there'd be some customers sitting at a high table sipping on your product. And I think I would try to keep that in mind in every phase of the operation, that the customer could see what I was doing and hear.
Yep. Yeah, our industry is very much performance art in a lot of ways. People want to see it. They want to know the stories. And, there's interest. There's consumer interest in the back of the house. And so that's a real advantage. That's how the open brew houses came to be. I mean, the whole brew pub model was putting production up front, and saying, we're making beer here in places where people didn't know. I've joked several times, and throughout the interviews on the Rising Tide, it's like that was a consistent story, that people didn't know people made beer. It's like it just showed up from just came out of the beer truck. And it's understandable. There were 3 breweries and none of them were showing that until the micro-owned brew pub movement started saying, and here's the brew house, and it's in our pub. or behind glass or out in the open or whatever. So, but you think about that, that's a huge change from, or it's at least a return to what it was probably like a long time ago. But that was not part of the brand story or the customer perspective in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and really here until late 80s. So, but it brings a whole different experience to the game in terms of how the team members and employees can be, like what that looks like, what it smells like, what it sounds like. All that starts to count when it's inside your tasting room. All right. Well, unless there's anything else, I'll jump to this last slide, which is just looking ahead. So you've got a homework assignment that I think previous ones, we weren't worried about whether they got attached or not. This is an ungraded assignment. So it doesn't have points attached to it, but I would like you to attach it in the module. And it's simple assignment, which is describe 3 potential jobs in the industry that interest you. Include the context of the business model and or size. So short description on, I envision this is what's happening in the company. And these are, and it could be 3 different contexts if you want, or it could be 3 jobs within the same company that you describe. Doesn't really matter, but I want you to envision and describe 3 different positions that are engaging to you. What makes it a good fit, and what do you bring to the role? And then next week we will start talking about business plan, which is putting a lot of this together. And we're gonna assign the group project. So if you guys have, I think we'll do 4 teams of 2. And if you guys have a desire to work with somebody, you can show up saying, 2 of us are going to work together on this. If you don't, then we'll just assign and figure that out. But the group project is going to be taking a business plan from start to finish. And so next week, we're going to cover the broad overview. And then the following weeks are going to cover elements of it. So really the second half of this class is walking through the various pieces that are going to make this business plan happen. And then previously we had quiz 3 scheduled for week 8, but I'm moving that to week 9. So that'll cover this week and business plan. Then you'll have that quiz on week 9. So that's what we got looking ahead. So you do have a little homework to describe your 3 potential jobs. And other than that, you got another week before a quiz. Any questions on any of that? All right. Well, if you're good, I'm good. You get out a couple minutes early. And thanks for the attention. We'll look forward to digging into business plans next week.
Very good.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Sounds good. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Take care.